So the digestive system is regulated by many different hormones. Several of them are produced by the duodenum itself. The duodenum coordinates gastric activity and digestive secretion according to whatever characteristics of the chyme is. It's basically whatever kind of food is coming in. So gastrin is secreted by G cells in the pyloric antrum and the enteroendocrine cells in the duodenum. The pyloric antrum secretes gastrin when stimulated by the vagus nerves or when food arrives in the stomach. Duodenal cells release gastrin when they are exposed to large quantities of incompletely digested proteins. The functions of gastrin include increasing stomach motility and stimulating gastric acid and enzyme production. Secretin is released when chyme arrives in the duodenum. Secretin's primary effect is an increase in the secretion of buffers by the pancreas, which increase the pH of the chyme. Among the secondary effects, secretin also stimulates secretion of bile by the liver and reduces gastric motility and gastric secretory rates. And gastric inhibitory peptide is secreted when the fats and carbohydrates, especially glucose, enter the small intestine. The inhibition of gastric activity is accompanied by the stimulation of insulin release at the pancreatic islets. The gastric inhibitory peptide has several secondary effects, including stimulating submucosal duodenal gland activity, stimulating lipid synthesis in adipose tissue, and increasing glucose use by your skeletal muscles. Cholecystokinin is secreted when chyme arrives in the duodenum, especially when the chyme contains lipids and partially digested proteins. In the pancreas, CCK accelerates the production and secretion of all types of digestive enzymes. It also causes the relaxation of the hepatopancreatic sphincter and contraction of the gallbladder, resulting in the ejection of bile and pancreatic juice into the duodenum. So the net effect of CCK are to increase the secretion of pancreatic enzymes and to push pancreatic secretions and bile into the duodenum. Presence of CCK in the high concentrations has two additional effects. It inhibits gastric activity and appears to have central nervous system effects that reduce the sensation of hunger. Vasoactive intestinal peptide stimulates the secretion of the intestinal glands, dilates regional capillaries, inhibits acid production in the stomach. By dilating capillaries in the active areas of the intestinal tract, VIP provides an efficient mechanism for removing absorbed nutrients. And enterocrinin is released by the enteroendocrine cells of the duodenum in response to stimulation by the vagus nerves before chyme reaches the pyloric sphincter, and also when the chyme enters the duodenum. It stimulates production of alkaline mucus by the duodenal submucosal glands, which protect the intestine from acidic chyme. So this graphic shows those different hormones and where they're being released and where they're having their effects. Okay, here are the phases of gastric secretion. You have the cephalic phase. This begins when you see, smell, and taste or think of food. It's directed by the central nervous system to prepare the stomach to receive food. The parasympathetic impulse goes down the vagus nerve and it stimulates the submucosal plexus. The postganglionic fibers then innervate the gastric gland cells. The gastric juice production increases, and this phase generally lasts only a few minutes. The gastric phase begins with stimulus as food arrives in the stomach, and this includes distension of the stomach, increasing the gastric content pH, presence of undigested materials, especially protein and peptides in your stomach. Gastrin secretion occurs that increases mixing waves of the stomach muscle contraction. It increases secretion by the parietal and chief cells, and this lasts 3 to 4 hours. The intestinal phase begins when chyme enters the duodenum, usually after several hours of mixing. Distension of the duodenum initiates the enterogastric reflex. It inhibits gastrin production. It decreases the gastric motility and secretion. It stimulates contraction of the pyloric sphincter, decreasing the chyme release into the duodenum. Mucus production is increased in the duodenum at this point. There are gastric central reflexes that are triggered by the stimulation of the stretch receptors in the stomach wall when it fills. This accelerates the movements along the small intestine. The rate of the chyme movement into the small intestine is fastest when the stomach is greatly distended. So you see we have the gastroenteric reflex and the gastroileal reflex. The gastroenteric reflex stimulates motility and secretion along the entire small intestine. The gastroileal reflex triggers the opening of the ileocecal valve, allowing the materials to pass from the small intestine into the large intestine. Okay, and then finally we're down to the large intestine, also known as the large bowel. It's usually about 4.9 feet, diameter is about 3 inches. Major functions are reabsorbing water, compacting intestinal contents into feces. It absorbs important vitamins that are generated by bacterial action. It stores fecal material prior to defecation. And there's 3 segments of the large intestine: the cecum, the colon, and the rectum. The cecum is an expanded pouch distal to the ileum. It collects and stores materials. It begins the process of compaction or compression into the feces. The opening between the cecum and ileum is called the ileocecal valve. It's attached to the appendix that we also call the vermiform appendix. About 3.6 inches in length, but the size and shape are different or variable. Contains numerous lymphoid nodules, and it functions as a lymphoid organ, actually. Appendicitis is inflammation of the appendix. The colon is the large diameter and thinner walled area. It's subdivided into 4 regions: the ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, and sigmoid colon. The ascending and descending colon are retroperitoneal and attached to the abdominal wall. And when we say retroperitoneal, we mean behind the peritoneal cavity. Transverse and sigmoid colon are suspended by the remnants of the embryonic mesocolon. The ascending colon goes from the cecum along the right margin of the peritoneal cavity to the inferior surface of the liver. It bends sharply to the left at the right colic flexure here. The transverse colon crosses the abdomen from right to left and is supported by the transverse mesocolon. It makes a 90-degree turn at the left colic or splenic flexure. And then the descending colon moves inferiorly along the body's left side to the iliac fossa, and it ends at what we call the sigmoid flexure. The sigmoid colon is an S-shaped segment. It's about 6 inches long and empties into the rectum. The rectum forms the last 6 inches of the digestive tract. It's expandable for temporary feces storage. Movement of fecal material into the rectum triggers the urge to defecate. There's other large intestinal structures also we'll talk about. There is the omental or fatty appendices. These are teardrop-shaped sacs of fat in the serosa of the colon. You see these right here and here. Then you also have the tinea coli, 3 longitudinal bands of smooth muscles that run along the outer colon surface deep to the serosa. They correspond to the outer layer of the muscularis externa and the other digestive tract portions. Also, the haustra. These are a series of pouches in the colon wall. They produce internal folding in the intestinal lumen, and they're created by the muscle tone of the tinea coli. They allow for expansion and elongation of the colon. Mass movements are the powerful peristaltic contractions that occur. They occur a few times each day in response to distension of your stomach and duodenum. They begin at the transverse colon and they push materials along the distal portion of the large intestine. If we look at the large intestinal wall, some of the major characteristics include the fact that they do not have villi. They have distinctive intestinal glands that are dominated by mucin-secreting goblet cells. The mucus lubricates the feces as it becomes drier and more compact, and the mucosa does not produce enzymes. The rectum. The anal canal is a distal portion of the rectum. It contains small longitudinal folds called anal columns. The epithelium transitions from columnar to stratified squamous epithelium. There's a network of veins in the lamina propria and the submucosa. We have increased venous pressure that can distend the veins, and that produces hemorrhoids. Increased pressure caused by pregnancy or straining during defecation can cause hemorrhoids. There are internal and external anal sphincters. The internal anal sphincter is an inner circular smooth muscle layer. It's not under voluntary control. The external anal sphincter is an outer skeletal muscle layer, and it is under voluntary control. And then the anus is the exit of the anal canal. The epidermis here is keratinized. Absorption in the large intestine accounts for less than 10% of all the nutrient absorption in the digestive tract, but it is important. We have vitamin absorption, biotin, vitamin K, vitamin B5. This is produced by the normal bacteria in the colon. Water reabsorption is very important in the colon. It prevents dehydration. About 1,500 milliliters of material enter the colon, and over 1 liter of water is reabsorbed through osmosis. About 200 milliliters of feces are produced. And ejected. Feces is about 75% water, about 20% mixture of indigestible material and organic matter, and the remains of epithelial cells, and only about 5% is bacteria. Bacterial compounds are what contribute to odor. Includes ammonia, indole and scatol, which is nitrogen-containing compounds, and hydrogen sulfide. The defecation reflex begins with distension of the rectal wall after the arrival of feces, and is triggered by the stretch receptors in the rectal wall. It involves 2 positive feedback loops, a long reflex that's coordinated by the sacral parasympathetic system that stimulates the mass movements that push feces towards the rectum from the descending colon and the sigmoid colon, and then a short reflex that stimulates the myenteric plexus in the sigmoid colon and the rectum. Feces moves into the rectum that causes distension and stimulation of the stretch receptor. Voluntary relaxation of the external anal sphincter allows defecation to occur. The long reflex is a spinal reflex coordinated by the sacral parasympathetic motor neuron, and that stimulates mass movements. And then the first loop is a short reflex that triggers a series of peristaltic contractions in the rectum that move the feces towards the anus.